when he saw 5 policemen run into his vehicle. They asked him to leave the car, and he asked them to identify themselves. They refused, dragged him to a police van stationed nearby, and took him to a police station.
Now we're going to talk about a question of human rights and someone who has been fighting for it in Russia. At the beginning of last month, the prominent Russian opposition activist Vladimir Kara-Murza was sentenced in Moscow to 15 days in jail on charges of disobeying police orders when leaving his home. 45 days after that, he's still imprisoned. Kara-Murza is a veteran critic of the Kremlin. He, more recently, joined on criticising the invasion of Ukraine and says he was deliberately poisoned in Moscow in 2015 and in 2017 as retaliation for his lobbying to impose US and EU sanctions against Russian officials accused of human rights abuses. I'm joined now in the studio by his wife, Evgenia Kara-Murza. Good afternoon to you, Evgenia.
Good afternoon.
You're fighting a campaign to get help for your husband. How is that going?
Well, I'm very new to all of this. I've never been a public advocate. I've never been a public figure before. So I'm learning as I go. And of course, I'm going to fight for as long as it takes me to bring the father of my children home.
Yeah. Most immediately, Evgenia, he is held in custody in Moscow. What about his conditions? Is he being reasonably treated as far as you know?
Well, my husband has been moved a lot since his detention. He was detained on April the 11th on, as you rightly pointed out, the charges of disobeying a police order. In fact, what had happened, the official police report said that on seeing the policeman, my husband changed the trajectory of his movement, behaved erratically and tried to flee. Whereas in fact, he had just driven up to his apartment building in Moscow where he lives. He parked the car in its usual spot and was still sitting in it when he saw 5 policemen run into his vehicle. They asked him to leave the car, and he asked them to identify themselves. They refused, dragged him to a police van stationed nearby, and took him to a police station where he was denied the right to call his lawyer, and he was kept overnight. Then on the next day, there was a trial that lasted, 30 minutes maybe, and he was sentenced like that to 15 days in jail. Unfortunately, we knew that this was only the beginning. He was supposed to be released on April the 26th, but on April the 22nd, he was charged under a new law that was adopted in Russia on March the 4th of this year, only 9 days after the war had broken out. And that criminalizes any opposition to Putin's war in Ukraine. And that law can send a person to up to 15 years in prison for, as the official text says, disseminating knowingly false information about the use of Russian armed forces. So basically, for calling this war a war and for saying that this is an unjust, unprovoked, vile war by the Putin regime, a person can get sent to prison for up to 15 years.
Yes, it's the latest oppressive law drummed up by the Russian regime to deal with opponents, with dissidents like your husband. And we saw what happened to Alexei Navalny. He was taken into custody, and then a heavier sentence was imposed in what looked like a show trial.
We believe that this is the tactic that the regime is now using against well-known opposition figures, as well as against ordinary citizens who come out to protest, despite all repressions that are being used against them. We think that they're trying to lock these people up to prevent them from continuing their work. The people like my husband, who's been very effective in advocating for personal sanctions against criminals in the Putin regime, for working, for advocating on behalf of political prisoners in Russia, and for opposing the war. And Alexei Navalny is very effective in his anti-corruption fight in Russia. So these people, the regime tries to lock them up and to get them away from the public eye, to prevent the work from continuing. Well, I'm sitting here, and I've taken over my husband's work, and I'm going to continue for as long as it takes. I'm going to speak out on behalf of all political prisoners in the Russian Federation, and the numbers are astonishing. Over 15,000 people have been detained since the beginning of Putin's aggression in Ukraine, all across Russia. There have been over 2,000 administrative cases already persecuted, under which people can get fines or sent to sort of short prison sentences of 15 to 30 days. Of course, we know that in Russia, 30 days can turn into 50 days, 50 days can turn into, a couple of months and so on. And 50 cases, over 50 cases so far have been initiated under this new law on disseminating knowingly false information, basically for calling a spade a spade. So I'm going to continue that work, speaking out on behalf of all political prisoners and demanding their release and demanding humane treatment, because Russian prisons are notorious for inhumane treatment of inmates. They're notorious for tortures and humiliation. And I'm going to continue Vladimir's work pushing for more sanctions against the regime and to make sure that Putin does not get away with this as he did in the past. After the invasion of Georgia in 2008 and the invasion of Ukraine, the war against Ukraine did not begin on February the 24th of this year. It began in 2014 when little green man walked into Crimea and annexed it. And then there was Syria. And so Putin became emboldened by this impunity. And as any bully, before or after him, any bully, when he feels that he's not getting punished for what he's doing, when he feels that he can get away with anything, he pushes forward.
Evgenia,
he wants more and more.
Evgenia, we wish you well with your campaign. I know you've spoken with the Europe Minister in the British government, James Cleverly, today. Tell us, how did that meeting go?
That meeting went very well, and I was very encouraged by Mr. Cleverly's absolutely principled position. He assured me that the British government would not forget my husband's case and would not forget all other prisoners of conscience in the Russian Federation, and that they would push. They would put pressure on the Russian authorities to release my husband and to release other political prisoners.
And your husband has been fighting a very high-profile campaign, and you do have a great deal of support around the world. Is it 25 different humanitarian organizations have come together and asked the United Nations to step in and press Moscow on your husband's behalf? So the campaign has a great deal of momentum behind it, but how much hope do you have it's going to bear on the Russian authorities in this present climate?
I think, well, first of all, I want to say that I'm so thankful for all the support that I'm getting around the world, and the fact that so many people are speaking out in Vladimir's support shows that his work has been noticed, that his voice is heard, because he's been such a fierce advocate for human rights. He's been such a fierce advocate for punishment, for bringing those criminals in the Putin regime to tribunal, hopefully, in the future, to make them, to hold them responsible for what they're doing, both in Russia and in Ukraine. And I do have high hopes, because I believe that this war will end the Putin regime.
Yes.
If Russian civil society continues protesting, and it does continue protesting against all odds, and if the West continues putting pressure on the regime, and if it does not let Putin get away with his war crimes committed in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, you feel sure your husband was poisoned on 2 occasions by the Russian regime, and I believe it's so. Is it not that your husband was followed by some of the same agents?
Absolutely.
Who followed Alexei Navalny?
He was followed by the same team of FSB agents who had followed Navalny before his poisoning. So basically, thanks to this amazing, absolutely brilliant investigation by the Insider and Bellingcat and I believe Spiegel, we now know the names and the faces of FSB operatives who are included in this team of assassins in the service of the Russian authorities. This is absolutely mind-boggling. We live in the 21st century, and the Russian authorities are using an assassin squad to physically eliminate the opponents of Putin's regime.
Yes. I mean, Evgenia, you're carrying on the work of your husband. You're now leading a campaign. picking up where he left off before he was taken off into custody. We know the way the regime treats dissidents, especially prominent dissidents who attract attention around the world. Is there a danger that you become a target yourself, that you attract that same kind of attention, Evgenia?
No, I don't think I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about bringing my children's father back to them, and I'm gonna keep on, absolutely. And my husband has never been afraid of any dangers, and he's been running very high risks to his life, health, and I'm trying to be as courageous as he is, and I'm fighting for someone I love. So I will keep on.
Well, we salute your courage. Have you heard from your husband recently about how things are with him?
I have the only contact I have with him is through his lawyer, and he does. We do exchange news, and we do communicate through his lawyer. Of course, it's not the same as hearing his voice.
Yes.
But well, that's better than him being in a coma, I can tell you, because in 2015 and 2017, both poisonings left him in a coma with a multiple organ failure. And I had no idea whether my husband would come back to me as he had been before. So, being able to communicate, at least through the lawyer, is definitely an improvement.